I know I've GM'd for some groups where even though I had this sort of set habits that worked really well, whenever you're with a new group, it's going to be specialized, and the things that you do and tweak are going to be in response to what those players like best. You know, I talk a lot about how Encounter's style of play was a bit different for me. They love that kind of in-voice character dialogue, which some groups, they're less interested in that, you know, to no fault. So yeah, I had to practice my voices, you know, get brushed up on that kind of impromptu NPC distinguishing, not just by description, but distinguishing by voice, by manner. Turns out I have a great Will Smith impression. I had no idea, but was prompted to do so by chat, and it went swimmingly, I think. There was lots of praise coming from chat, which is good. But yeah, that wasn't my forte, and that was something I had to develop and build to cater to the Encounter playstyle. Askren says, you're just finishing up the enemy for the trial stuff yesterday. Cool. Yeah, I was hanging out in Exploding Dice's stream. He was doing some session prep stuff, some GM prep. And if I recall, the party has just been captured by Koatoa, these strange fish people. And they're going to be confronting the Koatoa god, the deity or sort of swamp thing of sorts that these fish folk worship. And yeah, Askren wanted like something to do. You know, the party's been captured 2 or 3 times now, so I wanted to mix it up. So yeah, we were building sort of like a sequence of puzzles, I guess. But they were meant as like a series of trials or rituals for the party to purify themselves so that they were ready and prepared or worthy of confronting this god. So I think we had, you know, there was one to purify the body, purify the mind, purify the spirit. But of course, because the Koatoa are fish people, we had to come up with things, you know, what would a fish person conceive of, or what would their understanding of like a ritual to cleanse your body be? So we had to come up with those types of stuff. Yeah, Bilbdul Pulp is the name, indeed. Saxious. Of course, that's the official canon pronunciation right there. Yeah, so it was cool, building like a series of ritual rooms, which was kind of fun. Hopefully it goes well. Askren, let me know how your PCs like it. Let me know if they survive, and how the session goes. Hey, Gwen, how's it going? Going to start in about 2 minutes. Don't want to rush in case there are folks who are getting here for the normal starting time for the workshop. Let's get some tweets out. Of course, repeating tweets or repeating tweets. That makes me sound old. Retweeting the live tweet for the workshop won't get you a viewer decision tonight because we're not actually playing, but I will make a note of it because I GM tomorrow. So if you guys get 25 retweets on tonight's show, I transfer that into my Numenera game so that we can start a session tomorrow with a viewer decision, which is always a great hot mess. So it's all good. Just in time. The Mokrite, indeed you are. We're going to start in a minute or so, so no rush. Saxious asks, have you ever thought of something like having DMs join for chats? Yeah, at the end of the 24-hour streams, which I know can be really shitty time zone-wise, at the end of the 24-hour streams we have our sort of D&D and chill for those marathons. So it's a little bit different. It is just a standard Q&A. And we've had guest GMs who've played with us before, either as GMs or PCs, come onto that show, and it's been good fun. Dungeons and Distractions evening. How's it going? Da-da-da. Let's make sure we've got all the slides in order here. Rockin' PowerPoint old school, so we are good to go. But yes, actually, as far as the actual workshops, we could do some more talk show style stuff. Generally, we like to keep the sort of structure and tone of the actual content consistent. So we tend to run those ourselves. But no, would definitely be interested. You know, your point that every GM GMs differently, I know, is a big one. I think that's something we can highlight more by having more GMs on the show. You know, the GM style that Encounter likes for their sort of play style, just as people, not even as a show. It might be nice to mix that up once in a while, which is I think why we like having, you know, Gareth was GMing today for the first time. That made it a little bit new. Welcome, Dungeons and Distractions. To the adventure, you are a gentle distraction and a scholar. It's good to have you here, right as we're about to get started. Askren says, needs to pick me up some Tuesday to hang out on Fuzzy Dice and talk DM stuff. I would love to. I would love to, dude. I've seen your tweets a bunch, watched a couple of them, poured it over onto the YouTube, but haven't caught one of the streams. That would be sweet. Yeah, I'd be down. Do you do them every single Tuesday? And if so, do you have anything on this Tuesday? Because I might be free. Might be free this Tuesday. Zach just says, yeah, you could pick one topic and have 2 or 3 DMs discuss how they would approach the topic, because you'd get different answers for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what we like in the sort of Dungeon Master's Tavern, I think is what we call it, at the end of our big marathon streams. We have 2 or 3 of us all discussing, answering questions, and we sort of do a round table for each question to make sure you get lots of different sort of perspectives on it. So, yeah. The Mokrite, last thing before we dive in here, only just got into D&D and really like the GM side of things. Watched a few of these workshops on YouTube, now first to the live one. Cool, good to have you here. I know a couple of the workshops are for PCs. We'd like to sort of spread it a little bit to make sure that all new players have a little bit of something they can dive into. But yeah, we like these GM ones. It's cool that you like GMing right away. I sort of was the same way. I played a couple like sequences of adventures, wouldn't really call them full campaigns myself, as a player, but pretty much from the get-go I knew I liked GMing more so than being a player. You know, just for the variety, for having the story. It's a lot of fun getting to sort of orchestrate or ride along, depending on the group you're with, to sort of see the revelations and the realizations, watching, you know, players, you know, argue and dig through some of the puzzles or plot points that you've put together. It's super satisfying in a totally different way from running a game, which is cool. And you get to sort of enjoy vicariously what the players are doing as like PCs, but you also get to enjoy all the GM stuff too, so it's a good time. All right, one last swig of vino, and then we're going to get started. So remember, tweet out, retweet the tweet for this workshop being live. Try and get as many folks in here as we can, because I will do live Q&A at the end of the workshop if you guys have any specific questions about any of this content or just generally anything at all. We're going to talk for as long as you guys would like after this 1-hour workshop. So tell your friends that this is happening as we dive in. So we are, of course, Encounter Roleplay here on Twitch. We stream tabletop RPGs, a lot of D&D, starting to get into new systems now. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 2 shows. It's over 150 hours streamed live per month. All of the episodes then get put onto YouTube the next day in case you miss one, so you can track and see them later. And once a month we do a 24-hour stream because we are absolute fucking maniacs. And none of our bodies enjoy it, but it's worth it. It's a lot of fun. That's when we get a lot of guests. There's this really cool building community of D&D streamers now, and we get to get as many people involved in those marathons as we can, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, jump on those viewer decisions because you guys can fuck with my game tomorrow right away. If you don't know what a viewer decision is, if we get enough retweets to promote our live shows, we get enough patrons. You can check us out at patreon.com if you want to support our programming. And if we get donations from chat, we can do big straw polls where the chat, you guys watching the show, can decide a plot point in the story. You can throw in a magic item. You can add a new monster. You can have like a storm show up at the worst possible moment or the best possible moment, depending on your perspective. And we as the GMs incorporate that stuff right into the session because we think that interactivity is cool and it's a lot of fun, and it keeps us on our toes as GMs because it kind of takes away those bumper lanes that keep us safe. But it's all good fun and I enjoy it. All right, so for tonight, in our DM workshop, we wanted to continue with the theme that we've had for the last 3 or 4 workshops, which is really, really basic stuff. We know that we get a lot of folks who ask us to do more preliminary intro type content because a lot of the stuff that we do on stream, the discussions that we have, whether it's about rules or concepts, if you've never played a tabletop, it kind of goes over your head. There's terminology, there's rules, there's concepts that you've never been exposed to. So we've done some of these workshops that are really complex. They're for experienced players, experienced DMs, ways to like really sink your teeth into tabletop role-playing. But at the same time, we wanted to provide a complement to that, where we said, you know what, let's run workshops where we don't presume any terminology. We don't assume that players understand any rule set, let alone 5th edition or 3.5 or Mutants and Masterminds or something else. And we keep it really basic just to kind of ease people into it. So we've got a couple workshops like that you can check out. We've got some for players on how to make a character. We've got walkthroughs of just certain basic character sheets to explain, you know, what is an armor class? What is initiative? What are all these concepts, these terms? We've got a couple on how to work in Roll20, which is a great online space that we're going to talk about a little bit today towards the end, I think. So yeah, this is one of our more basic tutorials, one of the simpler ones, but it's for DMs. So we're shifting gears back. We've had a couple weeks of player content. Now we're back to the DM seat. So the Milk Rate, you're in the right spot. So we're talking about your first session. Now I didn't really know what to title this workshop initially because it's kind of a hodgepodge. There's a lot of different stuff that I tried to put in here for folks. And that's because, as Sax just said, like DMing is something that evolves. You know, you are going to develop your own style, certain things that work for you, certain things that don't. And it takes time. It's kind of this aggregate process of, after 100 sessions, I will have a really good handle on X or Y, or even after 2 sessions, I make that one mistake and then, oh shit, now I know to always have this on hand. So we wanted to kind of compile a list of things that, you know, for most DMs, if it's your first session ever, you may overlook. And by providing you with them in this workshop, you can have a little bit more of that kind of, I feel like I've run a couple campaigns experience, but in your first session. So you don't have to worry about some of those growing pains. You can feel a little bit more confident diving in. So for those of you who have checked out our workshops before, you know that we always start with our disclaimer, which is just have fun. We've got this wacky portrait of some Renaissance debauchery going on. Because the important thing is that if you're playing D&D or any other RPG, and your party is having fun, you're having fun as the GM, then there's probably nothing wrong with what you're doing. There's quite a lot of opinionated sort of camps, I guess would be the way to describe it, within this hobby, whether it's about different editions of a game, different ways to use certain rules. It can be fairly divisive, and we just want to say that all of our workshop content, everything I'm about to tell you, is a suggestion, more of a guideline than anything else. If it works for you, great. If you want to tweak it, awesome. If you think it's rubbish and you never want to see it again, that's okay too. We're just trying to share as much of the knowledge as we can for free to as many people as possible, so that more folks can play what we think are pretty fucking awesome games. So if you want to be any one of these folks in this picture or do any weird variations or weird versions of what we're going to say, that's okay. Nothing here is gospel. It's all guideline. So let's kick it off. What are we going to talk about for your first DM session? So as a DM, you know, you've got a rough sense of the rules. You know, you've probably looked through the game that you're going to play. More so than that, you've probably spent time thinking of the setting and the world and the plots. You know, what are the stories you want to tell with your players? But we've broken down sort of 5 different things, 5 different categories of things that you'll probably learn over time that work really well, that help you translate your overall idea or concept into the actual play of your first session. So we're going to talk about something called a session 0, which if you've never heard of, that's totally okay. We're going to talk about bookkeeping roles. Ooh, it is thundering. I got to close windows. Hold on. Just got him there. All right, we're back. So we're going to talk about session 0. We're going to talk about bookkeeping roles, which is like a really polite and technical way of enlisting your players to do your work for you so that there's less for you to worry about as the GM, which is something I like to do. We're going to talk about behind the screen. If you've never GM'd before and you always see a GM who puts up this fucking barricade with all this other content, then sometimes it's like, well, what the hell is behind there? Like, what secrets? Like, what is actually being done behind this screen? So we're going to talk about what some folks put behind their screens. It's not an exhaustive list by any means. I'm going to talk about what I like to have behind a GM screen if I use one. Stuff I like to have on hand physically in front of me that's different from just like knowing the rules and knowing the story for that night. What are some of the resources that are good to have with you physically at the table for your sessions, which you'll learn again. You run a session and go, shit, I wish I would have had X printed off in front of me before getting started. So yeah, Gwen, Canada's Thunder God is sure. Yeah. Of course, Axis is right. There's a couple secrets of what's behind the screen that I'm not allowed to tell you, that you'll just have to find out on your own. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I don't think so. What are the 3 main books for D&D 5th edition? The Player's Handbook is really the only main one. It has all the rules to run a game as well as play, and it has everything you need to make characters. The Dungeon Master's Guide is more just elaborative stuff, a whole lot of magic items, which you can always just make up as well. And the Monster Manual, which I'd say is probably more useful than the DMG as a DM, just because it has stat blocks for tons of fairly traditional D&D monsters and creatures and villains and stuff. So those would be your 3. After behind the screen, we're going to look at in-person tips and online tips. Now I've broken this up because originally I thought of, okay, what are some just basic things to keep in mind to run the game smoothly at your physical table. But then I realized, like, so much of what we play at Encounter is online. It's through Roll20. And a lot of folks now who can't find 5 or 6 folks to play a game with in their town, either at a game shop or at somebody's house, are going to play online as well. So given that we've got a lot of experience doing both, we wanted to talk a little bit about what are some good strategies to keep your game running smoothly, because there's some different challenges and some of the same challenges when you're running a game in person and when you're running a game online. So we're going to talk about both of those as well. Now I apologize for not having music in the background. I've been having some issues getting tabletop audio into my OBS. It's all good. You can head to tabletop audio right now and just put some background music on yourself. And we'll talk about music a little bit later. Maybe that's one of the secrets behind the screen. All right, so let's talk session 0. What is a session 0? Essentially, it's, when you think of, okay, we're going to have our first D&D session, most DMs initially think, okay, it's going to be like episode 1, like this is where the plot starts. This is the content. This is, okay, we're starting at, the village and the tavern. A good idea sometimes, depending on your group, depending on their experience level, depending on your comfort level, will be to have an entire session prior to that. So you have a session 0, or if you run really long D&D sessions, plan to have like at least an hour and a half or an hour prior to your first sessions of content actually starting. So you have like a good set amount of time where you're all physically meeting as if you're going to play to work out some stuff. And that can help the session get off to a better start. If you're dealing with a lot of these things during the first session content-wise, it can slow down the pacing, it can interrupt quite a bit. So having a session 0 is a good way to get things started, to actually kick off your campaign at the right pace that you want before diving in. So one of the things that the players are going to do in a session 0 is make their characters. And that's cool. You can all sit down, you can discuss, okay, who's going to be what. And again, if your party is really into party composition and roles and heavily tactical combat, they're going to really like this opportunity to be able to discuss what party roles are going to be taken over during fights, what kind of tactics or strategies they're going to have. But it's useful too for not combat heavy oriented players. You want to make sure we're not all running drow, rogue, ranger with 2 scimitars, God help us. You want to make sure there's some variety. Don't say his name in chat, I can't stand it. So making characters together rather than, just apart from one another can be useful to make sure that you don't get too much overlap. Further from this is a good strategic point. Insist, and sometimes you gotta, put your foot down as the GM. Players have to have full descriptions, whether they use cue cards, whatever it is they're going to use. Ram your band for saying his name. Players need to have full descriptions of their spells, abilities, things that they want their character to be able to do, because there's nothing worse during an intense combat than saying, all right, Susan, it's your turn. And Susan saying, cool, I'm going to cast a lightning bolt. And you say, okay, what do they need? And Susan has to look it up. And everything stops, and the pacing gets interrupted, and or if John has to look up how many points he gets on a rest, whatever, you want to make sure any weird stuff, and generally it's spells that are worse for this, because they take a little bit more time. If John wants to cast a spell, and you say, okay, John, your hands are tied behind your back, does that spell have a somatic component? What the fuck? If he doesn't know, he's got to have his cue cards. He's got to have something set and ready so that he knows his spells, so you don't interrupt too much. So make sure that when your characters, or when your players are making their characters, they're going in depth and they're making sure they've got everything they need. Page references to the spell location or the ability location, they can work if players are using an iPad, which is more and more common now. If that search function is fast enough, maybe let them, just sort of do the search on the fly. That's okay. But make sure that you emphasize that you want them to like really know their stuff so that you can keep the pacing okay, so you can get through more content per session. How's it going, Festive? Good to have you. So in session 0, the players are going to make their characters, first of all. And you as the GM are going to want to make player profiles. Now, importantly, this isn't just character profiles, but I like to have like a sheet that has my party on it, just like one-sided, 8.5 by 11. Thank you, Festive, for the follow. You are a gentle Natsu and a scholar. It's good to have you here. For player profiles, I like to have, race, class, 1 or 2 lines about their background, what's their motivation, the kind of content stuff you want to know about this character. But I also like to put 1 or 2 little notes about the player. So if you've never played with them before, you could ask them certain questions about their play style, things they like or don't like as much. So saying, do you really like tactical, gritty combat? Do you like horror type stuff? Talk a little bit about the tone. What games have you played in the past? Ask them sort of what they're looking for in the game, just kind of generally. If they say, oh, I really like the intensity of, exploring a dungeon and not knowing if there's traps, those sort of like tense, high lethality scenarios, make a little note. If they say, oh, I really like in-depth relationships with NPCs, make a little note, because then you can sort of give a little bit of what each player wants to that player in a given session. And then you've got, there isn't much that changes on that character sheet. If a character, contracts lycanthropy or something, you put that note on the profile so that you've got that sort of running tally. So yeah, having a cue card for each of your party members or a sheet for those characters is good to have. And that's something you can set up and actually have started during your session 0. Setting, introduction, and campaign background. Those are pretty intuitive. Those are things that you're going to already want to be thinking about as the GM. Where is this game happening? Do I want to flesh out a whole world or just a little province for now? But session 0 is a good time to give the party the map, show them the map so they can say, okay, pick where you're going to be from, tell them if there's any restrictions, so that they don't walk into the first session with a character that's kind of unrooted or unhinged. They have no sense of where they're from, what the politics are like, what sort of relationships they have to their surroundings. So giving that opportunity in session 0 to say to the party, cool, this is roughly the province or the kingdom. The last 100 years have been mostly X. So-and-so has been in charge for a while. Things are okay for these reasons. This little town is known for mining. This is a little fishing village. And just so they have a rough sense of the land. And that's going to develop over time, for sure. They're not going to be intimately connected to the setting until they actually role play in it. But giving some time in session 0 to start that process of familiarization can be good. So have your maps, I guess, if you're thinking of, what do I need to prep for session 0? You'd want to have your maps and your setting, a bit of your background set. And then your campaign background, depending on how you want your story to go. You can have quite a lot of information in here or not a whole lot. Give them sort of the tone or the atmosphere you're going to go for. Say the little plot hook that maybe everyone's heard. What's the rumor that's been spinning around in taverns? So-and-so sent a merchant's caravan up to the north and it disappeared, yada, yada, and that's sort of the initial hook. Just to sort of get your party interested so that they don't feel like session 0 is just fluff, like there's no actual content. Start getting them thinking like, oh, maybe it's X, maybe it's Y, maybe it's all these other things to get them sort of hooked and excited. Give them a bit of background. Or if you're doing a much bigger sort of political campaign, you'll want to plant some of those seeds. So over the last 6 months, these alliances have started to break down for these reasons. Here are the new borderlines. X faction is starting to prepare for Y conduct by doing all these different things. The kind of background stuff that any adult who's politically aware, who lives anywhere other than the woods, would know about. And if your players live in the woods, that's okay too, but giving some of that context. So setting, introduction, campaign background. Welcome, Milk Femtor. No, not welcome, host. Ooh, you guys get the good gif. That's a doozy. That's a Weird of Numenera gif right there. Yeah, Gwen does the travel montages a lot, which we can talk about at the end of this too. Travel mechanic. Big time, which can be a lot of fun. Yeah, party connections. So just underneath campaign background, your characters are all set. Your players know who's playing who. They've prepped their spells. They've got their abilities. You've got little player profiles written for each of them so that you've got a sheet that has, Joe is playing the barbarian. Barbarian is afraid of mice, whatever. You've got the setting introduction. You've shown them the map. You've talked a little bit about what the campaign is going to be like. One thing that I always really, really like to do is to have party connections established. Now you can either roll random ones, and if you check out our website, there's some options there for random tables, or you can just ask how the party members know each other, because over the course of a campaign or an adventure, a series of sessions, your players will develop relationships with their characters. But until that happens, the first session, which a lot of GMs don't realize, the first session can be kind of clunky in the role-playing because the characters, role-playing diligently are kind of standoffish. I've just met these people. I don't necessarily trust them. So no, we're not going to have the most engaging heart-to-heart conversation in preparation for X obstacle or objective that we have. So one way to kind of circumvent that or get a little bit more richness into the role-play right in the first session is to have party connections that precede the campaign. So if you check out our website, the article under RPG content for party connections, rolled party connections, I like to actually have my players roll on a random table, and that provides some kind of tangle or like a line, like a storyline or a narrative connection between two of the characters. So it'll be something like, all right, the martial character, the fighter, used to be in the town guard. You roll the random dice and it says, one of the other PCs used to be involved in a criminal organization, but they're not anymore. So you can sort of have the party discuss how they're connected. Robin, let us know what you're confused about, and we'll slow it down, we'll pull it back. Session 0 is sort of before you start your first session of a campaign, have a pre-session where everyone can make their characters. You can write some notes about who's playing in your group. You can have an introduction to the setting. You can tell them whether they're going to play in Tolkien's Middle-earth, whether they're going to play in a world that you've created, show them that world. And you can see how their characters know each other, because it's good to have the characters already being adventurers. Now, if you're starting a session or a campaign where nobody knows each other, that's okay. You can get rid of party connections. There's no need. So you can just have, okay, everybody's been kidnapped. You're all shackled together in a ship, and you're being tossed in the ocean, and that's how your campaign starts. That's okay too, and you wouldn't need party connections for that because they can all be strangers, and that's okay. So this is your sort of session 0 basic stuff. There's other things people can do in session 0, like discuss who's buying the beer, what food we're going to get, all that kind of stuff. But we are going to talk a little bit about at the table tips, definitely, towards the end of this workshop. But if you've never DM'd before, consider having a little 1-hour group where folks actually come and sit down an hour before the session technically is supposed to start, so that you can hash out who's playing what character and get everybody up to speed so you're all set and ready to go. So next we're going to talk about bookkeeping rules. Now this is something that I've done for quite a long time, and it's always been really useful, and I've never had a single PC who was upset about it. As the GM, you're going to have a ton of paper to deal with. You're going to have a lot of shit that you're juggling all at once. You've got a lot in front of you, and there's a lot to manage as the game goes. You've got to track who's doing what action. You've got to track all the NPCs or monsters. You've got to have a sense of where your party is on the map. You've got to know where the next trap is. You've got to know, you have to have a lot on the go at a time. So what I've always done from a pretty early on period GMing is I assign roles to the party, like to the players. So I'll say, okay, Joe, you're in charge of writing down all of the loot, all of the equipment, all of the stuff that you guys as a party pick up, even if it's in Susan's character's pack. You're, like, as a player, your role for this whole group is to just write down the loot, so there's someone who's in charge of that tally. So that's one less thing for me to deal with. Okay, this person took that, and Susan took the ring, and Joe took the art object, and whatever. Assign one of the party members to be your loot sort of bookkeeper. Similarly with maps and locations, make sure that one of them has the job of mapping and tracking what it is that they, where it is that they've explored, where they've been, and that's everything from, if you're doing like a physical map where you don't give them the dungeon, you just say, okay, you guys come down a hallway, there's a left and a right, and you're expecting them to draw it so that they can understand that they've come to a dead end and why and where they are. That can be fun. Or even just generally speaking, you've got one person who's in charge of knowing that, this city right now is, not allied with the next city over, which is allied with the weird tribe of bog people. So having that sort of map navigator, I guess, is the way to put it. So someone's in charge of keeping notes on the world, on the location. Similarly, NPCs, every time you meet an NPC, you've got someone who's got, we call it the phone book. Okay, Susan, you're in charge of the phone book. Anytime the party meets, the police inspector or they meet the coroner, you're the one who writes down, okay, police inspector, he's got the big mustache, this is how we remember him. He seems to really like X party member, but he's super suspicious of the mayor. Cool, got those notes, so the next time you talk to him, it's not everyone going, oh, fuck, was he suspicious of the coroner? No, maybe it was the bus driver, and you don't really know. And if you as the GM have that note somewhere, but it's 10 sessions ago, well, fuck, you don't want to be like flipping your binder. Okay, you guys forgot. Let me remind you who the police inspector is suspicious of. So it's good to have somebody who's in charge of the address book. So have one of your party members. You're in charge of NPCs. Every time I give a physical description, every time stuff happens, you've got to tally and track that for like the sake of the party as a group. And all this bookkeeping stuff just helps with pacing. It's less for you to do as the GM. It keeps things simpler for you. And the group as a whole gets to stay a little bit more coherent because there's less for them all to juggle instead of every player having to write down everyone's loot, all the locations, all the NPCs, all the quests. That keeps their head down in their notebook rather than up and discussing or looking at images or handouts and that kind of stuff. Excuse me. The Mork says that Roll20 is super handy for the handout system. Definitely, we're going to talk about that a little bit before. But yeah, if you're playing at a traditional table, you don't have the advantage of that. I know some groups have used things like group wikis, so you can set up like a website for your campaign where you sort of upload the NPCs as like a post on the website or on the wiki. But again, I think you could just similarly have that work delegated to a party member. If you're the one spending 3 hours prepping the session, then running the session for 5 hours, tell one of the other party members, okay, you're the one who uploads the PC posts or the NPCs, you upload the maps. Otherwise, you're going to have an extra 3 hours of post prep where you're the one who's handling the content. So definitely some kind of bookkeeping that's shared across the whole group of 6 folks who are going to play an RPG together can be beneficial, whether you're online or at a table. Quests is another good one. Making sure to know, you were told or given, this objective. You need to go, survive and make your way to X supply line and bring back, Y objects. But you're not supposed to let anyone find out that you're doing it for this person. So you've got, the positive things. What does the quest need you to do? And then there's the sort of the negatives or the arcs. What are you not supposed to do while doing this? What are the limitations, restrictions, risks, all that kind of stuff? Oh, there's rumors of weird bear-like creatures in that area. Okay, somebody write that down. So everything related to like your tasks, essentially. Positive, negative, rumors, all that kind of stuff. It can be useful because sometimes you'll get little hints from the GM 3 sessions ago that something might be going on in a certain area, and the party will forget. They're like, oh fuck, somebody should have written it down. So you can delegate all that stuff as well. And of course, beer. Beer is a good one. Whatever your role within the group is, whether as the GM you physically host the session. Whenever I played with friends in person, the GM never had to pay for their beer or soda, whatever. If you're not into alcohol, that's all good too. But offering the GM beer, or they pitch less for the pizza because they're the one who puts in the work prepping the game. It's all good. But figuring out who's gonna have food and that kind of stuff is an important piece, which we'll actually talk about in our table tips. But before we get there, as we move on, let's check. First session tip. Session 0, we talked about things to do before you really kick into your story bookkeeping, how to distribute the sort of roles and tasks within a session to take some of the load off. Now behind the screen. So Saxius, I'm sorry if this reveals any of your secrets. I didn't check this with you prior, but we're going to talk about what goes behind the screen. A lot of you have probably seen when a GM has all their shit set up, the most central piece is a goddamn wall between you and all of their notes, their tools, their resources, their iPad, their dice, everything that they need. And that's useful. It's useful to have that. It's useful to be able to look up at your content while also being able to look up at your players so that you're not turning your head down to dig through shit and then looking back. It keeps things immersive. And it's good to have those tools in front of you. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is actually in a DM screen, or what goes behind it. What do you set up? What do you bring with you to the table as the GM for your first session? This is not an exhaustive list, like we said. It's not meant to be the be-all and end-all, but it's helpful to have a good starting place, I guess would be the way to put it. So these are some of the essentials that I would never run a game without. These aren't the only things I bring. I've seen some super intense, elaborate DM kits that are like briefcases, like expandable, collapsible, which is super cool. That's not really my jam. I've never needed that much stuff for a session, but there's lots of different ways to do it. Like we've said, customizing your comfort zone and what works for you, what's the most efficient, is going to be a really personal process. But here are some things to start with. So let's check out what goes behind the DM screen. So one of the first most important things is your reference tables. So depending on what rule system you're using, most GM screens, the physical screen itself, like the cardboard barricade with the cool art on the outside, usually this is what is inside of it. It's reference tables. It's the rules, mechanics, all the sort of gritty content, a 6 means a -2, etc. All that sort of gritty shit. If your memory's not the best at memorizing a rule set, which it doesn't need to be, you've got them all in front of you. So if the barbarian says, I want to jump, how far can I jump? How many feet up can I jump on a 16? You can reference whatever table you need so that you've got that there in front of you. So that's what most screens are. Most purchased screens, the physical screen itself, will be exactly that. It'll be just a series of tables and sort of rules compressed so that you've got essentially your core rule set all in front of you and accessible. I've done a lot of making my own, so if there's a table that I don't really reference often, I'll get rid of it for something more important, print out a bunch of my own sort of art, not that I've made, God help me, but art from those artists or from the book, print it out and put it on the outside of my screen. So you can customize these. You don't need to purchase them. They're whatever you would find useful, whatever tables you find you refer yourself to the most often. Having the iPad can be good. I personally don't use an iPad for mine when I run sessions, but it can be useful too as a supplement for tables if you have easily searchable PDFs or digital stuff. But it can be a supplement to the reference tables, I guess the first bullet on the screen here. The next obvious one is campaign notes. Now I've thought about doing a whole workshop just on campaign notes, things to keep, things to track. But again, this is such a personal process. This is such a unique, individualized aspect of GMing that I don't think it would be too useful to talk about what works best for me and why. I don't think. If you guys would disagree, let me know. But your campaign notes, some folks use a binder, some folks use a digital file. I usually have all my prep stuff done in Scrivener, which is a cool word processing doc that's really useful. Yeah, Robin says you can have them on your phone, organized by folders. But the big thing that I make sure to have for campaign notes is sort of the large-scale story notes, the sort of conceptual major arc stuff that if I'm on, on the bus or, driving somewhere, I can think, oh, I just thought of this cool thing. After X objective, this is going to happen, and sort of keep that running tally of big picture stuff. You're going to want individual session notes. So what are the main encounters for that session, everything you've prepared for that night or that day's playing of the RPG. And another big piece for campaign notes is you want blank paper, or you want to have really generous margins in your session notes, because the party's going to do things you don't expect. You can try and breadcrumb them as much as you want, but at the end of the day, they're going to find ways to do things differently, which is good. You want to encourage that creativity. It's what makes D&D more fun than video games, for those who think it is, because it's more open. There's more options. But that means there's going to be unexpected consequences. So if you give the party a rushing river and they say, okay, well, I don't want to try jumping across the stones you've given me because my balance is terrible, and I don't want to try swimming because I'm terrified of swimming. So I'm going to go try and find a neighboring farmer and ask if I can cut down a tree. And then it's like, oh shit, I need to make up a farmer. Now there's this weird relationship that they have with this NPC. You need to be making stuff up on the fly as the GM. Now you may translate or transfer that live during the game content that has happened into your your stylized notes, whether it's a binder or a folder on your phone later, but you need to be able to take notes on the spot. So a big piece of campaign notes for when you're sitting down to play your first session is you need to have just blank paper. So it's like, oh cool, this party member drank a weird concoction for no reason and now they have blue hair. Or this party member, did X thing that I wasn't expecting and now there's an NPC who's out to get them. Or, they killed this, whatever. It's always good to have blank paper. And I know some folks just bring all the notes that they've prepped and then they end up scribbling madly all around as best they can. And it's a little bit harder to manage and a bit more unwieldy. So it's good to have some blank paper there as well. Gwen says you can create custom DM screens by getting those cheap subject folders from the office supply store and gluing or taping them together. They've got pockets inside for you to store your notes, and you can decorate the outside. Easy solution for less than $5. Very, very good call. I actually just bought, because I'm going to make a new screen for Numenera, I just bought, you can buy like fold-out cardboard. I think it was like $2.99 at the dollar store. Just like a 3 trifold for like science fairs and stuff. And I'm just going to cut it in half because it's higher than I need. And then I've got my base sort of 3. I'll probably fold it again in the middle to have 4 panels, and $2.99 for this pre-folded cardboard stuff, which is good. So those are 2 things behind the screen. Your reference tables, just the rules compressed, and also the campaign notes. So big picture campaign stuff, individual session encounters, monster stats, and then blank paper for the unpredictable inevitabilities that your party will throw at you. The next one is your player and your party notes. So this is the little sheet that you took during session 0, potentially. Joe is playing the barbarian, Susan is playing the sorcerer. Write those down, have that information, because as your characters, as your players do things in a session, you're going to want to add to those notes, right? You're going to want to remember that in session 3, Joe solemnly decided to kill X NPC because it needed to be done what he'd done. That NPC did this terrible thing that Joe's character couldn't get over, but that's weighing heavy on Joe, who hadn't maybe killed someone who wasn't armed before. Maybe he's got one of those generic sort of warrior codes. So it's important to write down that you now know that Joe's character is extra sensitive about that, and then those are things you can bring back and keep teasing out of his character. Robin says, what D&D edition, player handbook, and monster manual should I get? Also, I'm concerned because I read on Amazon that most of the products, books, the pages fall out. The edition thing is a loaded question. You could dive into any number of them that you like. 5th edition is great for starting players. It has a lot of the sort of traditional aesthetic content that's been carried over from the development of 20 years of D&D, but it's a little bit simpler of a mechanical rule set, so it's a bit more accessible. As far as pages falling out, I've never had that issue, but again, because I don't try to make reference to pages during games, I don't put a lot of wear on my spines or on the adhesive, because I know some folks who have their game books out for the whole session. If you're constantly pressing down and playing on your book, maybe that would cause, any amount of binding to take more wear and tear than a normal hardcover coffee table book that gets flipped through every couple weeks. But I haven't had much of that in my experience, but who knows. You can also check out for 5th edition, Robin, there is a free PDF online on the Wizards of the Coast official website. That's the SRD is what they call it, which is a compressed set of the rules to explain how to play and give you what you need. They've got a quick reference guide for new folks diving in that explains it. Lots of different ways to dive in without investing if you're worried about the books. So behind the screen, diving back in, reference tables, your rules that you've got quick access to, campaign notes, notes for that session, and having notes for things that are going to happen that you don't predict, so having space to write in blank paper. Can you send me the link to the PDF? I will check it out after this workshop. You can also just Google Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition free PDF, and it'll take you to the Wizard site on one of the first handouts for sure. Party and player notes, like I said, making sure you've got somewhere where you can tally and track developments or new stuff happening to your party members when they make a big, heavy moral decision. Make a note of it. Random NPCs and random loot. Now, this is like an old staple for just about any GM. Whether you're going to use random tables for this or whether you're just going to prep before the adventure, I've shifted from using random tables to having prepped NPCs and loot. But the idea is that you can almost guarantee that your party is going to open a drawer or open a door that you haven't planned or expected them to. So as exhaustively as you're going to design your town, down to every building and every villager, eventually they're going to want to find someone who, in your mind, doesn't exist yet. They're going to say, "Ooh, okay, you know what? We're trying to find a way down to the sewers. I want to find like the mason who was commissioned to help build these sewers, because they might know about whether there's like weak points or like secret passages or whether there was a crypt underneath." And you're going to think to yourself, holy shit, I told you there's a priest you can go to. I told you can talk to the mayor. But if they want to go find this mason, all of a sudden you need a character that you haven't designed yet. So having random NPCs is super useful. Anytime the party walks into a tavern, it shouldn't be empty. So you don't just want to say, there are a dozen humanoid silhouettes and you can't see their features because I don't have actual NPCs to be in this bar right now. You want people, you want characters, you want texture. So having random tables where you can roll for random NPCs. A lot of folks will have just a list of like 100 NPCs or like 100 pieces of loot for when your party picks the guy's pocket or checks the drawer. A list of 100 NPCs that just says, you know, I rolled a 67. Male, dwarf, gray beard, scar over his eye, loves to talk about how the young kids are ruining everything. So crusty old man attitude. And that is just so much better than making it up on the fly. Some folks are really good at improvising three-dimensional textured characters, but having a list of like even just 10, I think I usually have been rocking with 10. So I'll have 10 NPCs and I'll have their physical description, their sort of social disposition, and I'll have one weird quirk about them. And I'll just have 10 of them ready, and generally I don't have a job or like a trade or a role or a profession ascribed to them. It's just, here are these 10 folks. So if the party says, oh, I want to go find like a spice merchant for something, cool. Number 3 is now a spice merchant. I put him into my game world notes, scratch him off my random list, and before the next session, I'll make sure I've got 10 fresh NPCs that I can use, so that when the party goes around in the world, everywhere they turn, they see fully developed, rich, dynamic characters, and they feel like it is like a real world, as opposed to like a prepared story. You don't want your players to feel like they've gone off the rails, and they can tell that because the quality is shittier. You want to make sure that you've got content that's ready to throw in, just random accessible stuff that you can improvise on the fly. Gwen says, in her last session, the PCs were intended to encounter a town, quiz a few people in the bar for info, and move on. They ended up staying overnight, and the simple encounter turned into an extended, there's no quiet place to sleep, / the mayor is corrupt, / we have to get to the top of the mayor's tower to survey the land adventure, and it took the whole session. So that's exactly the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. And you can allow the players to contribute to the story in that way too. And it's not about, you know, having a sandbox. You can still have a traditional story that they're eventually going to finish, but the way that they go about that story is almost always going to lead to unexpected places for you. And you've got to be able to populate those places in a big way so that you've got texture and intrigue and sort of richness, so the world seems like it is a real world to your players. So having random NPCs and random loot is great. Random loot, a little bit more intuitive. It just gets boring to hand out gold pieces. You know, you can tell them you find 65 gold pieces worth of X, or just a bag of gold. But even just saying, okay, you find a small elephant sculpture made of jade with the left tusk broken, approximately you'd appraise it's worth like 30 gold. So they can still tally, okay, how much raw gold do I have if I want to buy the sword or the armor or the cape or the wand or whatever. But it gives it a little bit more texture. They've got something to work with, something a little bit more unique, and maybe their character will become interested or intrigued by the object more so than just its raw sort of monetary value. So random loot is good, and music. Now, music doesn't have to be behind the screen. This is, how about finding a dildo as loot? I mean, it wouldn't be unheard of. I'm sure there have been many candlesticks that started in their description in a way that led the players off or unexpected. But yeah, nothing's really off the table. I guess it depends on the age of your group or your party. Having music is really great for setting the scene. Being able to switch like the background music from like background forest to like dark, dingy dungeon really, really adds to the immersion. I know it's a small thing and it seems kind of tacky, but it always really adds to it, especially when you're 3 hours into a session and you've kind of forgotten that the music is ongoing, and then all of a sudden the music shifts. It really has a lot of pull for the players. So definitely having music of some kind, even if it's just tabletop audio on your phone, YouTube, Lord of the Rings soundtrack and just know where your markers are to jump to songs, whatever it is for you, you can dive right in to help set your tone for your game. But music is key. Music is super useful. Roll20's got built-in music, which we can talk about a little bit later, which is useful for that too. So those are some core things behind the screen. If you've got anything else that you keep behind your screen when you GM, let me know. We're going to talk about all this stuff in about 15 minutes here. Because everyone's prep, everyone's GM kit is going to be unique, different, personalized. These are some of the core things that most GMs will probably use in some capacity. Referencing for their rules, notes for that session and the campaign, notes for all of their players and characters, some random NPCs, random populating content, and some loot that they can throw out, and of course some kind of atmospheric music. Zig-a-zigs, did you miss anything important? I mean, probably not. Let us know if you have any questions, and we can go back to any of these slides during the D&D and Chill in a little bit. So after behind the screen, we said we're going to talk about some of the differences between the different hurdles or obstacles or challenges from playing in person at a table with sort of folks that you know or at a game shop and playing online. Because there's some things that are similar, there's some obstacles that are the same in both scenarios, but there's some that are very unique to that set type of experience playing an RPG. So we're going to talk about some tips to handle both of those, things to keep the game running smoothly, and you'll probably see a trend between the two, which is sort of your biggest issue to deal with as the GM when managing the actual play. So let's start with DL the DM, who has joined the adventure. Welcome. DL, you are a gentleman and a scholar. It's good to have you here in our DM workshop. Hopefully you can tune into any of our shows during the week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 6 hours a day, RPGs. So let's check out in-person tips. So if you're playing like a traditional D&D, Pathfinder, whatever system you're using, playing a traditional game, there's a couple things that are important to keep in mind. Generally, because it's pretty tough to schedule and get 6 folks to sit at a table together for an extended period of time. Most sessions, in my experience, have been like anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. Much shorter than 3 hours feels like you're not getting as much done just because you've all taken the time to get together. Let's invest. Let's have a good night and play through. Some folks do marathons. They do like 12 hours once a month or something crazy. It all depends on your group, and that'll be unique to the folks in the scheduling. But there's some things that can be difficult in person that you can try and mitigate and think about as the GM that you may not expect because you're so focused on my story and my content and my game and my setting that you forget that the success of the session also has to do with the 6 people sitting around a table together being able to play a game for an extended period of time and keep that momentum, keep their focus, and stay attentive to your game. So one big one is phone or reference rules. So, I mean, when I started, this wasn't as much of an issue because not as many folks had cell phones, but making sure that everyone at the table is paying attention is huge because you don't want to have to redescribe or reread because someone who was listening is going to shut off while you're rereading or redescribing, and it can really disrupt the flow. So having either like a no phones rule or whatever, or making sure to sort of keep it to a minimum. Again, you don't have to be draconian, but it's something that you might not expect, but it has a huge impact on the actual game experience when people aren't paying as much attention because they're on Twitter or they're checking XYZ. So try to keep as much focus as you can at the table, keep the phones to a minimum, and same thing with referencing rules. So when you're playing a game and Joe needs to check what his spell is, everybody stops and waits for Joe to check his spell. So that's why you want your players to be able to have their character stuff ready, have their content prepped for what they need to play that character fully. Saksha says they have snackifices. That's a good rule. Quintus says you step away if you're not part of the game. Yeah, there's lots of ways to deal with it. Checking up a rule. So let's say a party member says, cool, I want to try and like suffocate this guy. Like I want to grapple him and like put him in like a sleeper hold and just literally like choke him out. But you're not sure, shit, do I remember seeing, okay, was it this system or was it a previous edition that had like a really complex set of rules on how to do that? And you're not sure. The big thing is the GM, you don't want to waste too much time with everybody stopping to dig through books. You want to just kind of dive in and keep things moving. That said, if it's combat related, so if you're in turn-based combat, one way that you can resolve this is to ask a player whose turn it isn't, say, hey, can you look up this rule because your turn isn't for another 3 or 4 more rounds. Look up to see what this is quickly while we go to the next person and sort of go from there. So it's not to say that you can't reference or check rules. This is kind of why you have your reference tables. Hopefully that should be most of what you need in front of you. But if you do need to crack a book open, try to keep it to a minimum and delegate it in a way that it won't disrupt quite as much. Regular breaks is huge, and I think this helps with focus. This helps with people not pulling out their phones and checking rules if they need to, that kind of stuff. Plan to take, every hour we stop so that if you need to go to the washroom, you can. You don't have to. Every hour we stop so that people can step away from the table, move on, and come back fresh after 5 minutes, so that it's not every 6 minutes one of you is either going to the washroom or getting another beer or checking, on, the pizza order or whatever else. So you have planned set breaks so that when you're not on a break, everybody is focused and diligent and really sort of like immersed in the game. Food is important, super important. It's tougher for us on stream because we try not to eat on stream. But you don't realize, and I'm sure other GMs in stream right now can attest to this, like that experience of you've described a scene or a room or a monologue by an NPC. You've given a description to the party and you look up the table and half of them just have this kind of glazed look because you've been playing for 5 hours, and they kind of blink and they say, okay, and they just have no idea what you just said. They're just not tracking. They've just kind of slipped out of it. Blood sugar is a real thing. You got to make sure folks can eat. You got to make sure everyone is going to have the energy and the stamina to play for 4 hours, because even a 3 or 4 hour session is taxing. It's like if anyone's done film marathons where it's like, oh, let's watch all 3 extended Lord of the Rings in a day, or let's watch X number of Harry Potters at once. When you're mentally focused, it's tiring, it's exhausting, even if you're physically doing nothing, just watching a film. Same thing with D&D. If you're mentally focused, but mostly just sitting there like a rock lobster. I get it. A rock lobster. Good to have you here. Welcome to the DM workshop tonight here in Encounter Roleplay. So having food is important. So have a plan for food before you start your session. Okay, who's going to bring what? Are we going to share? Are we not going to share? What's the plan? So that you don't have to stop 2 hours into your session and say, fuck, you know what? I am starving, but we don't have a plan, and now I'm hungry, so I can't think. Are you going to buy, or did you buy last time, whatever? Just have something in plan. Either everyone brings their own food, or you're on like a rotating cycle or whatever. When you're playing in person, you're going to have food. Otherwise, that 4th hour is going to be fucking excruciating 9 times out of 10, because players are going to be tired. They're going to get hangry. They're going to be cranky. They're not going to be paying as much attention. And it's just going to take away from the game. So you might as well plan for it. You're planning all of this content in your prep. So plan for everyone to be like, as close to 100% at all times as they can. Dropped dice rule is another one moving along here for tips when you're playing at a table in person. Dropped dice rule, really simple, important to establish. You got to make sure you've got something in place so that first time, again, if this workshop is for your first session, someone rolls and it goes off the table and it's a 20 on the floor, you don't have players fighting over it. Oh, no, you're supposed to re-roll. But like you could see it's a 20, like my foot didn't hit it, didn't hit it. Just say, cool, everything that falls on the floor, you re-roll it, so don't even look at it. Or wherever it falls, that's what it is. Have something in place just so it doesn't have the opportunity to spiral out of control. And PC check-ins. This is kind of a weird one. This is something that I do in online games or in person. So this kind of goes both ways. And this all relates to, if you haven't smelled the theme yet, one of the biggest obstacles that a GM doesn't realize they're going to run into in trying to get a successful session completed is just focus. Your party members, your players are going to lose focus because they're on their phone, because they have to go to the bathroom, because they're hungry, because they're fighting over rules, or because so-and-so dropped XYZ, or because they're just like not in it that day for whatever reason, which is valid and fine. Or if they're online, which we'll talk about, they're on Facebook, or like you see they're on the webcam and they're fucking looking at their other monitor playing Hearthstone or something, which enrages me to no end. So doing check-ins is a great, really subtle strategy that seems like it's just you as the GM trying to role play more and trying to get more character out of your players. But it's a really good like meta way to help keep everybody paying attention. So all player check-ins or PC check-ins means is every once in a while, like pause after someone has said something or done an action, or after an NPC said something, or when they're setting up camp, and just ask a random player, Susan, how does your character feel about that fight earlier with the caravan? Like, did she got mixed feelings? Was she okay? You know, it's been like 6 years since she was in like the militia, so it's maybe the first time in a while that she's killed, you know, other people. I know they were goblins, but is she feeling weird about that at all? And just have her just talk for a second about her character's response, or, you know, what is in their character's head. So a lot of these are like psychological. They're not things that the character's going to say. They're not really shared or known by the other characters, but they're a great way not just to help like shy players or quiet players be more involved, but it's a great way to make sure that all the players know that they need to be paying attention. Because after 2 sessions, if they realize, oh, this GM will just randomly ask me questions about my character's response to X, so I should probably be paying attention. It's a good proactive way to keep the game focused, to keep folks invested, so they don't get too distracted. But also, it is a like genuinely really good tool for building story. These are the things you can add to your PC and player you know, note cue cards. You can say, oh, maybe Susan's character really is struggling with having killed those goblins and is, you know, going to be carrying that for the next 3 or 4 sessions. So PC check-ins are great for that kind of focus, but also as a nice barometer check story-wise to see how the character is doing. So if the main theme behind these in-person tips is focus, how do you keep 6 different people with different attention spans and different interests and different personalities? How do you keep them focused for 4+ hours? Regular breaks, phone rules, food, you know, consistent rules so you don't have to stop for it, and PC check-ins. Robin says, how do you keep your characters feeling separate